The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years, but it was not the kind of peace that came from harmony or understanding. It was the peace that came from fear. The Velcrin Dominion ruled over 200 star systems and 47 different species, and no one dared to challenge them. Their warships were legends of destruction, equipped with quantum disruption weapons that could tear apart entire fleets in minutes. Their shields could deflect any known weapon, and their military tactics had been refined over millennia of conquest. When the Velcrin arrived in a star system, resistance meant death and surrender meant servitude. Most species chose to surrender. The Alari Confederation had been the last to resist. They were a proud warrior race with a fleet of 10,000 ships and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. They had believed their numbers and courage would be enough. They were wrong. The Battle of Alari Prime lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, the Alari homeworld was a burning ruin and their fleet was nothing but debris floating in the void. War Master Zetharax, the commander of the Velcrin forces, had made sure the entire galaxy watched the battle through captured broadcasts. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who defy us. Captain Jake Morris had watched that broadcast from the bridge of the TSS Defiant, and it had made his blood run cold. He was a career military officer, 38 years old, with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the odds. He had joined Earth's stellar navy 5 years ago, when humanity had finally achieved faster-than-light travel and realized they were not alone in the universe. The Defiant was one of only 12 warships that Earth had managed to build, a modest vessel by galactic standards, with heavy armor plating designed to withstand asteroid impacts and railgun batteries that fired solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds. It was not elegant or sophisticated like the alien ships Morris had seen in the data files, but it was tough and reliable, much like the crew that operated it. Lieutenant Nina Blake stood at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across the holographic displays as she analyzed the Alari battle footage for the 100th time. She was 29, sharp-minded and relentless when it came to solving problems. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes were focused with an intensity that made most people uncomfortable. She had been studying Velcrin tactics since humanity first learned of their existence, and she was convinced there had to be a weakness somewhere in their seemingly perfect military machine. Chief Engineer Greg Palmer was down in the engine room, as usual, making adjustments to the Defiant's power systems. He was a big man with calloused hands and a mind that understood machines better than people. He had grown up on a mining colony where equipment failures meant death, so he had learned early to keep things running no matter what. The Defiant's engines were his pride and joy, and he had made dozens of unauthorized modifications that technically violated Stellar Navy regulations but made the ship 15% more. Efficient Lieutenant Danny Rogers manned the weapons station with the easy confidence of someone who had been shooting targets since he could walk. He was from Texas, stocky and muscular, with a drawl that got thicker when he was nervous. He had served in the United States Marine Corps before joining the Stellar Navy, and he approached space combat with the same straightforward mindset he had used in ground battles. Identify the target, aim carefully, and don't miss. The Defiant's railguns were his responsibility, and he knew every quirk and characteristic of those weapons better than he knew his own family. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. They were on routine patrol near the outer edges of human-controlled space, checking on mining operations and remote colonies. It was boring work, but Morris preferred boring. Boring meant everyone went home alive. He was reviewing supply reports when the communications officer called out, "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from New Montana Colony." Morris looked up sharply. New Montana was a frontier settlement, home to about 8,000 colonists who were trying to terraform a harsh but resource-rich world. It was 3 light years from their current position. "What's the nature of the distress?" Morris asked. "Unknown, sir. The signal is automated and fragmented. It just keeps repeating under attack and then cuts out." Morris felt his stomach tighten. Under attack could mean anything from pirates to equipment failure, but given the current galactic situation, he had a bad feeling about this. He looked at Nina, who was already pulling up star charts and calculating jump coordinates. "Nina, how long to reach New Montana at maximum speed?" 4 hours, Captain. Do it. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The Defiant's engines roared to life as Greg pushed them to their limits. The ship leaped forward, and the stars stretched into lines as they entered faster-than-light travel. Morris stood from his command chair and walked to the tactical display. Nina was already bringing up everything they knew about New Montana: population, defenses, strategic value. "It doesn't make sense," Nina said quietly. "New Montana has no military value. It's just farmers and miners trying to make a living." "Why would anyone attack it?" Morris had a theory, but he did not want to say it out loud. If the Velkrin were moving into human space, they might start with isolated colonies to test humanity's response and capabilities. It was a classic strategy: probe the edges, gather intelligence, then strike at the heart once you understood your enemy's weaknesses. 4 hours felt like 4 days. The crew went through weapons checks and damage control drills. Danny test-fired the railguns into empty space, watching the projectiles disappear into the void at a fraction of the speed of light. Greg rerouted power systems to prioritize shields and weapons. Nina ran simulation after simulation, trying to predict what they might face when they arrived. When the Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Montana system, the first thing they saw was smoke. The colony's main settlement was burning, visible even from orbit as angry orange flames against the planet's gray surface. The second thing they saw made Morris's heart sink. 3 ships hung in orbit above the colony, sleek and deadly, with the distinctive curved hulls and energy signatures of Velkrin warships. They were smaller than the massive battleships that had destroyed the Alari fleet, but they were still far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. "Captain, they're hailing us," the communications officer said, her voice tight with fear. Morris straightened his uniform and nodded. On screen, the view screen flickered and an alien face appeared. It was reptilian, with scales that shimmered like oil and eyes that were entirely black. This was Sub-Commander Crintok, though Morris did not know his name yet. The alien studied Morris with what might have been amusement. "Primitive vessel," Crintok said in perfect English, which meant they had been studying humanity longer than anyone had realized. "You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Your species has been selected for evaluation. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction. You have 1 hour to comply." The transmission ended before Morris could respond. The bridge was silent. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for orders. Morris looked at the burning colony below, at the alien ships that thought humanity would simply roll over and surrender, and he made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Battle stations," he said quietly. "Load all railgun batteries. Charge the point defense systems. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." The hour passed like a countdown to doom. Jake Morris stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the 3 Velkrin ships maintain their perfect formation above New Montana. They had not moved, had not powered up weapons, had not done anything except wait. The confidence bothered Morris more than threats would have. These aliens truly believed that one human ship posed no danger to them whatsoever. Nina Blake worked frantically at her station, her fingers flying across the controls as she gathered every scrap of data the ship's sensors could collect. Energy signatures, hull configurations, weapon placements, shield frequencies. She fed everything into the tactical computer and ran analysis after analysis. The results were not encouraging. The Velkrin ships each massed about twice what the Defiant did. Their power output was 3 times higher, and their weapon systems were based on technology that humanity barely understood. "Captain," Nina said without looking up from her displays, "their shields are operating on a rotating frequency pattern. It cycles every 4.7 seconds. The shields are designed to deflect energy weapons by dispersing the impact across the entire field. But here is the interesting part. I am not seeing any physical armor plating underneath those shields. I think they rely entirely on energy defense." Morris leaned forward. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? Their shields might not be optimized to stop solid projectiles, sir. They have probably never needed to defend against kinetic weapons, because every other species in the galaxy uses energy-based armaments." Greg Palmer's voice crackled over the intercom from engineering. "Captain, I have rerouted power from non-essential systems to the railgun capacitors. We can fire a full broadside with 40% more velocity than standard. It will burn out the coils after 3 salvos, but if we are going to do this, we should hit them as hard as possible." Danny Rogers checked his weapons panel and grinned despite the tension. Railguns are loaded and ready, Captain. Just say the word. Morris took a deep breath. He thought about the 8,000 colonists on New Montana, who were probably dead or dying. He thought about the Alari Confederation, and the billions who had perished when they tried to resist. He thought about Earth and humanity's place in this vast and dangerous galaxy. Then he opened a communication channel to the Velcrin ships. This is Captain Jake Morris of the Terran Stellar Navy ship Defiant. We do not recognize your authority over human space or human citizens. You have attacked our colony and killed our people. Leave this system immediately or face the consequences. There was a long pause. Then Subcommander Krintok's face appeared on the view screen again. The alien was no longer amused. His black eyes seemed to bore into Morris with cold fury. You dare threaten us? Your species has barely left your home system. You know nothing of war or power. We have conquered civilizations 1,000 times more advanced than yours. I will destroy your primitive ship, and then I will return to your homeworld and reduce it to ash. This is your final chance. Surrender now. Morris smiled, though his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Come and get us. He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. All hands brace for combat. Nina, I want firing solutions on all 3 ships. Danny, target the lead vessel first. Greg, give me everything the engines can handle. Let us show these bastards what humans are made of. The Velcrin ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Defiant. Krintok's vessel led the charge, its hull beginning to glow as it powered up its quantum disruption weapons. The other 2 ships moved to flank, trying to surround the human vessel. It was a standard encirclement tactic, one that had worked against countless opponents over thousands of years. Morris had no intention of playing by their rules. Helm hard dive, full thrust. Take us under their formation. The Defiant's engines roared and the ship dropped sharply, angling beneath the approaching Velcrin vessels. The aliens adjusted their course to follow, but the Defiant was more maneuverable than they expected. The human ship's angular design and powerful thrusters allowed it to change direction with surprising speed. They are charging weapons, Nina called out. Impact in 20 seconds. Rotate ship, present ventral armor, Morris ordered. Danny, the moment we complete rotation, fire all forward railguns at the lead ship. The Defiant spun on its axis, presenting its heavily armored belly to the Velcrin weapons. A beam of twisted space-time lanced out from Krintok's ship, the quantum disruption weapon that had shattered so many vessels. It struck the Defiant's armor and tore into it, ripping through the outer plating and causing entire sections to buckle and warp. Alarms blared across the bridge as damage reports flooded in, but the armor held. The Defiant's designers had built the ship to survive collisions with asteroids and debris at high speeds. The armor was meters thick in places, layered composites of steel and ceramic and exotic alloys. It was primitive compared to energy shields, but it was solid and real, and it did not fail. Hull breach on decks 4 and 5, the damage control officer shouted, sealing bulkheads. Casualties reported. Fire, Morris commanded. Danny Rogers unleashed hell. 6 railguns fired simultaneously, each one accelerating a solid tungsten projectile to a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles crossed the distance between ships in less than a second. The Velcrin shields, designed to deflect and disperse energy, tried to stop the solid metal rounds and failed catastrophically. The shields flickered and overloaded as kinetic energy punched straight through them. 4 of the 6 rounds struck Krintok's ship, and the results were devastating. The projectiles tore through the Velcrin hull like paper. Without armor plating beneath the shields, there was nothing to stop them. 1 round destroyed the ship's main power conduit. Another punched through the bridge, killing half the command crew instantly. A third detonated the forward weapons array in a brilliant explosion. The 4th went completely through the ship and out the other side, leaving a gaping hole that vented atmosphere and bodies into space. Krintok's ship went dark, tumbling out of control, atmosphere and debris streaming from multiple hull breaches. The other 2 Velcrin vessels broke off their attack, their commanders clearly shocked by what they had just witnessed. A human ship, a primitive vessel that should have been obliterated in the first exchange, had just crippled their commander's ship with weapons that seemed impossibly crude. Target the 2nd ship, Morris ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Fire when ready, but the Velcrin had seen enough. The 2 remaining ships accelerated away from the Defiant, moving to retrieve survivors from Krintok's crippled vessel. They maintained their distance, weapons charged but not firing. It was clear they were reassessing the situation, trying to understand how their superior technology had been defeated by kinetic projectiles. Nina was staring at her displays in disbelief. "Captain, they are withdrawing." "They are actually withdrawing." Greg's voice came over the intercom, filled with excitement.
"Captain, did we just win?"
"Did we actually beat them?" Morris watched the Velcrin ships maneuver to dock with their damaged companion. He saw escape pods launching from Krintok's dying vessel. He saw the other ships collecting those pods with what almost looked like panic. They were afraid. The unstoppable Velcrin Dominion was afraid of one human warship. "Danny, maintain target lock but hold fire," Morris said. "Let them recover their people and leave. We have made our point." It took 30 minutes for the Velcrin to recover their survivors and retreat. They jumped to faster than light speed without another word, leaving the Defiant alone above New Montana. The colony was still burning, but there might be survivors who needed help. Morris ordered a full damage assessment of the ship and then authorized landing parties to search the colony. The cost had been high. 17 crew members were dead from the hull breach, and another 23 were injured. The Defiant's armor was scarred and twisted, and 2 of the railgun batteries were destroyed, but they had survived an engagement with the Velcrin and won. It should have been impossible, but it had happened. As the crew worked to rescue colonists and repair the ship, a message was being transmitted across the galaxy at light speed. The Velcrin scout fleet that was supposed to evaluate humanity's military capabilities had been defeated. One of their ships had been crippled by primitive kinetic weapons. The species that ruled 200 star systems and 47 races had been challenged by humans and found wanting. In the Velcrin capital, War Master Zethrax received the report and felt something he had not experienced in decades: rage. He immediately ordered a battle fleet assembled. 50 warships would travel to this Earth and teach these upstart humans the true meaning of power. The galaxy would learn that challenging the Velcrin Dominion meant death, no matter how lucky you got in one small battle. But in that same moment, on a dozen different worlds, other species were hearing about the battle and feeling something they had not felt in a very long time: hope. The news reached Earth before the Defiant did. Admiral Helen Carter stood in the command center of Stellar Navy headquarters in Geneva, watching the communication feeds light up with reports from across the galaxy. Species that humanity had barely heard of were suddenly sending messages of congratulations and support. The battle at New Montana had been witnessed by automated monitoring stations that dozens of civilizations maintained throughout the galaxy, and the footage was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Helen Carter was 56 years old, a career officer who had served in 3 different Earth militaries before they unified under the Stellar Navy. She had gray hair cut short, sharp blue eyes, and a reputation for making hard decisions without hesitation. Right now, she was making the hardest decision of her life. The Terran Council wanted to open negotiations with the Velcrin, to apologize for the incident and seek peace. Carter knew that would be a fatal mistake. The Velcrin would see it as weakness and crush humanity without mercy. "How long until the Defiant returns?" she asked her aide. 6 hours, Admiral." Captain Morris transmitted a full report. "They rescued 412 colonists from New Montana. The rest are dead." Carter closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about those 4,000 people who had died simply because they were human and in the way. Then she opened her eyes and began issuing orders. "I want every available ship recalled to Earth immediately. Contact the shipyards and tell them to accelerate construction on all vessels currently under production. I do not care if they are only half finished. Get them into space. Pull every qualified pilot and crew member from reserves and training. We have maybe 3 weeks before the Velcrin respond, and when they come, they will come with everything they have." The aide hesitated. "Admiral, the Council has not authorized mobilization. They still believe diplomacy is possible." "The Council is wrong," Carter said flatly. "Get me a direct line to the President. I will explain it to them personally." While Carter fought political battles on Earth, the Defiant limped home with its cargo of traumatized colonists and its crew of exhausted heroes. Jake Morris had not slept in 36 hours. He stood on the bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen, and wondered if he had just started a war that would end with humanity's extinction. Nina Blake sat at her station running simulations, trying to figure out how 12 human warships could possibly stand against a full Velcrin battle fleet. The math was not encouraging. Greg Palmer was in engineering. surrounded by repair crews who were trying to patch the worst of the damage. The hull breaches were sealed, but the armor was still twisted and scarred. 2 of the 6 railgun batteries would need complete replacement, which would take weeks in a proper shipyard. The chief engineer was already designing modifications in his head, ways to make the Defiant stronger and more lethal for the next battle. Because there would definitely be a next battle. Danny Rogers was in the medical bay, visiting the wounded. 3 of his weapons crew had been killed in the hull breach, good people who had trusted his orders and followed him into combat. He felt responsible for their deaths, even though everyone told him he had done everything right. War had a cost, and sometimes the cost was paid by people you cared about. When the Defiant docked at Earth's orbital station, Morris and his senior officers were immediately summoned to headquarters. They took a shuttle down to Geneva and found themselves in a conference room with Admiral Carter and a dozen other high-ranking officials. The Terran Council members appeared on view screens, their faces showing various mixtures of fear, anger, and confusion. Captain Morris, the Council President, began, "You have created an unprecedented situation. The Velcrin Dominion is demanding that we turn you over for trial and execution. They claim you fired on their ships without provocation and murdered their crew members. How do you respond to these charges?" Morris stood at attention, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from the battle. "With respect, sir, the Velcrin attacked a human colony without provocation and killed 4,000 civilians. When we arrived to investigate, they demanded our surrender and threatened to destroy us. I defended my ship and my crew. If that is a crime, then I am guilty." Admiral Carter stepped forward before the council could respond. "The Velcrin are not interested in justice or diplomacy. They are testing us. They attacked a remote colony to see how we would respond. If we surrender Captain Morris, they will see it as weakness and attack again. If we apologize, they will attack again. The only language they understand is strength, and Captain Morris showed them that humanity is not weak." One of the council members, a nervous man with thin hair, spoke up. "But surely we cannot fight them. They have hundreds of ships and we have barely a dozen. It would be suicide. It would be survival." Carter said firmly, "The Velcrin are coming whether we want them to or not. Our choice is whether we face them on our feet or on our knees. I choose to stand." The debate went on for hours, but in the end, Carter's view prevailed. Earth would mobilize for war. Every ship would be called home. Every weapon would be prepared. Every soldier would be ready. The Terran Council authorized Carter to take full command of Earth's defense with whatever resources she needed. It was a blank check written in desperation, but it was enough. Morris and his crew returned to the Defiant to find repair teams swarming over the ship. Greg Palmer was arguing with a shipyard supervisor about the specifications for the new railgun batteries, insisting they needed to be more powerful than the originals. Nina Blake was meeting with intelligence officers, sharing everything she had learned about Velcrin tactics and technology. Danny Rogers was training other weapons officers, teaching them the techniques that had allowed him to punch through Velcrin shields. 3 weeks later, the Velcrin arrived. 50 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, a fleet that outmassed the entire human navy 10 times over. War Master Zethrax commanded from his flagship, a massive vessel bristling with weapons and shielded by technology that had defeated every opponent he had ever faced. He sent a message to Earth, his reptilian face filling every screen on the planet. "Humans, you have defied the Velcrin Dominion and killed our warriors. For this crime, your species will be punished. Surrender your weapons and your ships, deliver Captain Jake Morris to us for execution, and accept permanent subjugation. You have 12 hours to comply. If you refuse, we will destroy your orbital stations, then your cities, then every human presence in this system. Your species will serve as an example to all who would dare challenge our authority." Admiral Carter sat in the command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of all ships in the system. The human fleet, 12 warships and 30 support vessels, was positioned near Mars, using the planet's mass and orbital defenses to their advantage. It was a pathetically small force compared to what they faced, but it was all they had. She opened a communication channel that broadcast to the Velcrin fleet, to Earth, and to monitoring stations across the galaxy. Her voice was calm and clear without a trace of fear or doubt. "War Master Zethrax, this is Admiral Helen Carter of the Terran Stellar Navy. Humanity does not surrender. We do not bow. We do not serve. You want Earth? Come and take it. She cut the transmission and turned to her officers. All ships, battle stations, prepare to defend our home. On the Defiant, Jake Morris stood on the bridge as the crew rushed to their positions. Nina was coordinating with the other ships, setting up firing solutions and attack patterns. Greg had the engines running at peak efficiency, ready to give them every advantage speed and maneuver could provide. Danny had his railguns loaded and aimed, his hands steady on the controls. "Captain," Nina said quietly, "the odds of survival are not good." Morris smiled grimly. "The odds have never been good. That has not stopped us yet." The Velcrin fleet began its approach, 50 ships moving in perfect formation toward Mars and the tiny human fleet waiting there. Zethrax was confident this would be over quickly. The battle at New Montana had been a fluke, a lucky shot against overconfident scouts. Now he would show these primitives what real military power looked like. What he did not know was that humanity had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Every weapon had been tested and retested. Every tactic had been studied and refined. Every crew member knew exactly what they had to do. And most importantly, help was coming from an unexpected source. As the 2 fleets closed to weapons range and the first shots were fired, 3 other fleets emerged from faster-than-light travel behind the Velcrin formation. The Toller, the Hessian, and the Reax had arrived with 40 ships between them. They were species that had suffered under Velcrin rule for generations, and they had been inspired by humanity's courage. Now they were ready to fight. The Battle of Earth had begun and the galaxy was watching. The Battle of Earth raged for 2 days and changed everything. When the Allied ships appeared behind the Velcrin formation, War Master Zethrax realized for the first time in his career that he might actually lose. The battle became chaos as ships from 4 different species attacked the Velcrin fleet from multiple directions, refusing to engage in the traditional line combat that had always favored the Dominion's superior firepower and coordination. The Defiant led a group of human ships in hit-and-run attacks against the Velcrin command vessels. Jake Morris had studied every second of footage from the Battle of Alari Prime and noticed that the Velcrin relied heavily on networked communications between their ships. If you disrupted that network, their perfect coordination fell apart. Nina Blake had identified the communication relay ships, smaller vessels that stayed behind the main battle line and transmitted orders. Those became the priority targets. Danny Rogers fired salvo after salvo of railgun rounds, each one calculated to punch through Velcrin shields and strike critical systems. The human weapons were crude but devastatingly effective against an enemy that had never needed to armor their ships. Greg Palmer pushed the engines beyond their rated capacity, making the Defiant dance through space in patterns that confused Velcrin, targeting computers designed to track more predictable opponents. The Toller ships were fast and agile, darting in to strike and then retreating before the Velcrin could respond effectively. The Hessian had brought electronic warfare systems that jammed Velcrin sensors and communications. The Reax were heavily armored like the human ships, and they used that durability to form a defensive screen, absorbing fire meant for more vulnerable vessels. It was not elegant or coordinated, but it was effective in a way that caught the Velcrin completely unprepared. Admiral Carter commanded from her flagship, the TSS Victory, orchestrating the chaos into something resembling a strategy. She had divided the Allied fleet into small groups, each one focused on a specific objective. One group attacked the Velcrin supply ships, cutting off their ability to rearm and refuel. Another group focused on the heavy battleships, using concentrated fire to overwhelm their shields. A third group, led by the Defiant, hunted the communication relay vessels. Zethrax tried to restore order to his fleet, but the humans and their allies refused to cooperate with his tactical expectations. They did not line up for proper combat. They did not respect the traditional rules of engagement. They attacked from unexpected angles, used weapons that should not work, and coordinated their efforts in ways that seemed almost random, but were devastatingly effective. By the end of the first day, 15 Velcrin ships had been destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 4 warships and the Allied species had lost 8 vessels, but they were winning through sheer unpredictability. On the second day of battle, Zethrax made a desperate decision. He ordered his remaining ships to concentrate their fire on Earth itself, hoping to force the humans to surrender by threatening their homeworld. Quantum disruption beams lanced down through the atmosphere, striking cities and infrastructure. Millions died in the first minutes of the bombardment, but Admiral Carter had anticipated this possibility, and she had prepared a response. Hidden on the far side of Earth's moon were 6 heavy missile platforms, installations that had been built in secret during the 3 weeks of preparation. They were loaded with nuclear-tipped missiles, primitive by galactic standards but frighteningly powerful. Carter gave the order and 200 missiles launched simultaneously, arcing around the moon and accelerating toward the Velcrin fleet. The Velcrin shields could deflect energy weapons, but missiles were solid objects carrying their own propulsion and guidance systems. The Velcrin point defense systems destroyed most of them, but 63 missiles got through. When they detonated among the tightly grouped Velcrin ships, the results were catastrophic. Nuclear fireballs expanded in the vacuum of space. Electromagnetic pulses disrupted systems, and shrapnel from destroyed ships became deadly projectiles that tore through neighboring vessels. Zethrax's flagship was struck by 3 missiles and went dark. The War Master barely made it to an escape pod before his ship broke apart. The Velcrin fleet, already battered and demoralized, began to withdraw. Some ships retreated in good order, covering each other as they jumped to faster-than-light speed. Others simply fled in panic, abandoning damaged vessels and scattered escape pods. When the battle ended, debris from both sides filled Earth's orbital space. The human fleet had been reduced to 8 operational warships. The Allied species had lost half their ships, but the Velcrin had lost 37 vessels, and their aura of invincibility was shattered completely. Species across the galaxy had watched the battle and seen that the mighty Dominion could be defeated. The weeks following the battle were chaotic. Zethrax and the surviving Velcrin forces retreated to their home territories, and the War Master faced intense scrutiny from the Velcrin High Council. He had lost the largest fleet assembled in a generation to a coalition of species that should have been easily defeated. His reputation was destroyed and his position was in jeopardy. Meanwhile, Earth became the center of a growing resistance movement. Species that had suffered under Velcrin rule for decades or even centuries began reaching out to Admiral Carter, asking to join the alliance. Within 2 months, 17 different species had signed mutual defense treaties with humanity. The Terran Council, which had been reluctant to fight, suddenly found itself leading a galactic coalition. Jake Morris was promoted to commander and given a new assignment. He would lead a training program, teaching other species how to fight using human tactics and adapt their weapons to be effective against Velcrin shields. Nina Blake became the chief intelligence officer for the entire Allied fleet, coordinating information gathering and tactical analysis. Greg Palmer supervised the construction of new hybrid warships that combined human durability with alien technology. Danny Rogers trained weapons officers from a dozen different species, sharing the techniques that had allowed him to punch through supposedly impenetrable defenses. But victory in one battle did not mean the war was over. The Velcrin Dominion still controlled 200 star systems and commanded resources that dwarfed what the Alliance could muster. Zethrax, desperate to restore his honor and prove his worth to the High Council, began planning a new offensive. He would not attack Earth again. Instead, he would strike at the supply lines and industrial centers that supported the Alliance. He would target the shipyards and colonies that provided the resources for the resistance. He would wage a war of attrition that would slowly strangle the Alliance until they had no choice but to surrender. Nina Blake, working with intelligence agents from the Hessian, managed to infiltrate a Velcrin communications network. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The Velcrin were planning a massive assault on the Tolar homeworld, which had become a major manufacturing center for the Alliance. If the Tolar fell, the Alliance would lose half its industrial capacity and the resistance would collapse. She brought the intelligence to Admiral Carter immediately. Carter assembled her senior commanders, including Morris, and laid out the situation. The Velcrin were gathering a fleet of 200 ships at a staging area near the Krellnos system, where they maintained their largest shipyard. The fleet would attack the Tolar homeworld in 3 weeks. The Alliance could try to defend the Tolar world, but they would be outnumbered and likely destroyed. Or they could take a terrible risk and strike at Krellnos itself, destroying the shipyard and hopefully crippling the Velcrin's ability to replace their losses. Morris looked at the tactical displays and the probability calculations that Nina had prepared. A strike on Krellnos would require penetrating deep into Velcrin territory, fighting through their defenses, and destroying a facility that was protected by 70 warships and countless defense platforms. The odds of success were less than 20%. The odds of survival were even lower. "If we do nothing, the Toller will fall and the Alliance will collapse," Carter said quietly. "If we defend the Toller homeworld, we will lose. But if we strike at Krelnos and succeed, we can change the entire balance of power in this war. We can show the galaxy that the Velkrin are not invincible, that their industrial might can be challenged. That hope is not lost." She looked around the room at the faces of officers from multiple species, all of them scared but determined. "I will not order anyone on this mission. It is too dangerous and the chances of coming home are too small. I am asking for volunteers." Morris stood up first. "The Defiant will go." One by one, the other commanders stood as well. Toller captains who wanted to save their homeworld. Hessian officers who had lost families to Velkrin oppression. Ryax warriors who believed in the cause. Human captains who trusted Morris and Carter. By the time the meeting ended, 30 ships had volunteered for the mission. A strike force that would travel deep into enemy territory and attempt the impossible. They had 2 weeks to prepare for the most dangerous operation of the war. The strike force departed from Earth 2 weeks later, 30 ships carrying crews from 4 different species united by a common purpose. Jake Morris commanded the operation from the Defiant, coordinating with captains who spoke different languages and used different tactics, but all shared the same determination to strike a blow against the Velkrin dominion that would echo across the galaxy. The journey to Krelnos took 5 days through hostile territory. They traveled in silence, avoiding populated systems and staying away from known patrol routes. Nina Blake had mapped out a path that used gravitational anomalies and censored dead zones to hide their approach. It was risky because one wrong calculation would drop them out of faster-than-light travel in the middle of a star or too close to a black hole, but the risk was necessary. On the 3rd day, they passed through a region where the Alari Confederation had once thrived. Morris stood on the bridge looking at the debris fields that were all that remained of a civilization. Millions of ships and billions of people reduced to floating wreckage. It reminded him why they were doing this, why the risk was worth taking. The Velkrin had to be stopped, or this would be the fate of every species that valued freedom. When they reached the Krelnos system, they found exactly what Nina's intelligence had predicted. The massive shipyard hung in orbit around a gas giant, a structure so large it had its own gravitational field. 70 Velkrin warships patrolled the area in carefully coordinated patterns, and dozens of defense platforms ringed the shipyard itself. It was the most heavily defended target the Alliance had ever attempted to attack. Morris gathered his command team and laid out the plan one final time. The Toller ships would strike first, using their speed to draw the Velkrin defenders out of position. The Hessian vessels would jam communications and sensors, creating confusion. The Ryax ships would form a defensive screen to protect the more vulnerable vessels. And the human ships, led by the Defiant, would punch through to the shipyard itself and destroy the reactor core. "This is going to be ugly," Morris said bluntly. "Some of us will not make it home. But if we succeed, we will save the Toller homeworld and give the Alliance a fighting chance. Remember your training. Trust your crews, and do not hesitate." The attack began at dawn Krelnos time. The Toller ships swept in from multiple directions, their weapons blazing as they engaged the outer patrol ships. The Velkrin responded exactly as predicted, breaking formation to pursue what they thought were scattered raiders. That was when the Hessian activated their electronic warfare systems, and the entire Velkrin communication network went dark. Chaos erupted among the Velkrin defenders. Without networked communications, their carefully coordinated tactics fell apart. Ships that should have been supporting each other were suddenly isolated and vulnerable. The Ryax vessels moved in, their heavy armor absorbing fire as they created corridors for the human ships to advance. The Defiant led the charge toward the shipyard. Danny Rogers unleashed a continuous barrage from the railguns, targeting defense platforms and clearing a path. Greg Palmer pushed the engine so hard that warning alarms blared across engineering, but he kept them running at 120% capacity. Nina coordinated with the other human ships, adjusting their approach based on real-time sensor data. The Velkrin defenders realized too late what the real target was. They scrambled to reposition, but the Hessian jamming and the Toller harassment kept them off balance. Morris brought the Defiant within range of the shipyard's shields, and then executed the maneuver they had practiced 100 times. Greg detonated a resonance bomb. a device that Greg had designed specifically to disrupt shield harmonics. The bomb exploded in a pulse of energy that cascaded through the shipyard's shield matrix. The shields flickered, then collapsed completely. For 30 seconds, the shipyard was vulnerable. That was all the time they needed. Morris gave the order and every human ship fired simultaneously. Railgun rounds and missiles converged on the shipyard's reactor complex, the massive power generators that supplied energy to the entire facility. The Velcrin had never armored the reactor because the shields were supposed to be impenetrable. They had made the same mistake they always made, assuming their technology was superior and that no one would find a way around it. The projectiles struck home and the reactor went critical. A chain reaction began deep in the heart of the facility, explosions spreading through the structure like fire through dry wood. Hundreds of partially completed warships representing years of construction were consumed in the blast. The shipyard itself began to break apart, massive sections tearing free and tumbling into the gas giant's atmosphere. War Master Zethrax arrived with his reinforcement fleet just in time to watch his greatest shipyard die. He had been en route to lead the attack on the Tolar homeworld when he received word of the raid on Krelnos. Now he stared at the destruction and felt something he had never experienced before: despair. Without the shipyard, the Velcrin could not replace their losses. Without the ability to build new ships, they could not maintain their dominance over 200 star systems. But Zethrax was not ready to surrender. He had one final card to play, one last chance to restore his honor and crush the upstart alliance. He would destroy the strike force before they could escape. He would kill Commander Jake Morris personally. He would show the galaxy that the Velcrin still had power. His flagship, the Devastator, was the most powerful warship ever built by the Velcrin. It was twice the size of any other ship in the system and carried weapons that could destroy planets. Zethrax ordered it to intercept the Defiant, and he broadcast a challenge on all frequencies. "Human Commander, you have destroyed our facility and killed our people. Now face me in single combat. Ship against ship. If you win, my fleet will withdraw. If I win, you will all die here." Morris looked at Nina, who was already running probability calculations. The Devastator outgunned the Defiant by a factor of 10. Its shields were more powerful, its weapons more advanced, its armor thicker. Fighting it one-on-one was suicide. "He is lying," Nina said quietly. "Even if we win, his fleet will not withdraw. This is about his honor, not military strategy." Morris smiled. "I know, but he is also giving us exactly what we need. If we can keep him focused on us, the rest of the strike force can escape." That was always the plan. Get in, do the damage, and get as many people home as possible. He opened a channel to the other ships. "All vessels, this is Commander Morris. Break off and jump to faster than light speed immediately. The Defiant will engage the flagship and buy you time to escape. It has been an honor serving with you." The other captains tried to argue, but Morris cut them off. Admiral Carter's voice came over a priority channel from Earth, demanding that he retreat. He ignored that too. He had made his decision. The Defiant turned toward the Devastator and accelerated to attack speed. Zethrax's ship responded, its massive weapons beginning to charge. The two vessels closed on each other, a tiny human warship facing a Velcrin super battleship. It should have been a massacre. What Zethrax did not know was that Greg Palmer had spent the last 2 weeks modifying the Defiant in ways that violated every safety regulation in the book. He had rerouted all power systems to feed the railguns. He had removed life support from half the ship to increase capacitor storage. He had turned the Defiant into a weapon, sacrificing everything for maximum firepower. When the Devastator fired its quantum disruption beam, the Defiant took the hit on its heavily reinforced forward armor. The beam tore through layers of metal and composite, but the ship held together. Then Danny Rogers fired every railgun at once, a synchronized salvo that carried more kinetic energy than anything humanity had ever created. The projectiles crossed the distance in less than a second. The Devastator's shields tried to stop them and failed. 6 tungsten rounds struck the flagship's bridge section, and one of them punched straight through to where Zethrax stood. The War Master had just enough time to realize he had lost before the round vaporized him and everyone around him. The Devastator went dark, its command structure destroyed. The other Velcrin ships, seeing their leader dead and their shipyard in ruins, lost their will to fight. Some retreated immediately. Others surrendered. The battle was over, the Defiant was dying. The forward section was torn apart, life support was failing, and the engines were about to explode. Morris ordered the crew to the escape pods. They had minutes at most. As the crew evacuated, Morris stayed on the bridge with Nina, Greg, and Danny. They watched the other ships of the strike force jump to safety. Mission accomplished. "We did it," Nina said softly. "We actually did it." A rescue ship appeared, one of the Toller vessels that had refused to leave. They beamed the 4 officers aboard just as the Defiance reactor went critical. The ship that had started a revolution exploded in a brilliant flash, and Morris watched it go with mixed feelings of pride and sadness. The strike on Krellnos changed everything. With their primary shipyard destroyed and their greatest warmaster dead, the Velcrin Dominion sued for peace. Negotiations began on neutral ground. Species that had been conquered began declaring independence. The galaxy entered a new era. Jake Morris returned to Earth a hero, but he did not feel like one. He had lost good people and a ship he